So look, here we are. We're trying something a little new, which is we're all gonna hop on video together. Here we are, Jody and Nikki and Kelly. Um, Look, we started this podcast to look at history, but in large part because we feel like we're living through historical times, and history has a lot to tell us about when stuff happens that feels like it's history making. Stuff happened that is history making. We're doing this a few hours after Trump is found guilty on 34 of 34 counts. And so we thought we'd just talk a little bit about what historical moments we're looking at in this moment. There's lots of takes flying out there, but maybe a little historical perspective from us will be useful. So we'll do this short. I know Kelly, you're at home. I'm at home. Nikki's in New York. Was just out at dinner and is now back at the hotel. What'd you guys talk about at dinner, Nikki?
I think that the beginning of the conversation was 34, and then the rest of the conversation was along those lines. We're in the heart of Manhattan, which is where this verdict was handed down. And it was a meeting of a group who had been working on the Obama presidency oral history project. And so in thinking about what it means to think about a presidency, the fact that a former president has just been found guilty of 34 felonies feels like a pretty pivotal moment. And I just want to flag, as we're beginning this conversation, found guilty tonight of 34 felonies. We don't know how many of those felonies are going to stick on appeal. And I think that's going to be part of the conversation, which is, I spent a lot of time thinking about Iran-Contra, where a lot of people were found guilty of a lot of things and then didn't spend a lot of time in prison. So I'm going to puncture the balloon early on. Conviction is not always accountability.
Yeah. And of course, there's the next big date on the calendar, pending appeals, is July 11th, right? Where there's going to be
4 days before the Republican National Convention.
Yeah, where there's going to be a sentencing. So I guess that's where my head's at too, and it's something that I've learned a lot from this show is, this thinking about accountability and reckoning and justice, and how our country is generally not good at those things. But, you can puncture the balloon, Nikki, but I also feel like there is a real moment here of the very simple act of a jury taking this stand. And frankly, like even the trial itself, regardless of the jury outcome, feels like notable in the sense of there was a attempt at a reckoning that we have not seen. I mean, we did an episode a few weeks ago about how Jefferson Davis was sort of brought up on treason charges and never faced that jury trial. And there never was that sort of tangible moment of reckoning in the wake of the Civil War. And, putting aside what these charges happen to be about, the fact that there was at least that sort of wheels of justice turning, I don't know, feels like a big moment.
Listen, I was shocked because I feel like for so long people have been, sort of saying Teflon Don, nothing's going to stick, I have well understood that the criminal justice system is not always just, and that oftentimes very wealthy people have ways of either skating around the law or getting around convictions. And so I really didn't think that. I thought it was going to be a mistrial. I thought that this was not going to get a guilty verdict. And when it did on all 34 counts, I was like, whoa, that's huge. Whether he serves time or not, and that matters, but whether he serves time or not, that this is history making. And I did think about the episode that we did on Jefferson Davis. And I thought a lot about, like, what does it mean to pursue the highest office in this country as a felon? And while that's legal too, like you can actually pursue the White House as a felon, but as a felon, you can't vote. Like the duality of that. If you are a felon in dozens of states throughout the United States, you cannot vote, and not vote, not just in one election, but in every election for the rest of your life. And I can't square that injustice.
So, I mean, I think that's something worth lingering on for a second, which is that it is possible, and I don't know all of the ins and outs of the vagaries of when these things go into effect, but it is entirely possible that you could have a presidential candidate who cannot vote for himself in the presidential election because Florida has felony disenfranchisement. And I'll just go on the record and say felony disenfranchisement is unjust and shouldn't be in effect. But in this case, like, that's entirely possible that Donald Trump can't vote for himself in the presidential election. And it is a momentous occasion, and it's never happened to a presidential candidate before. They have been a convicted felon, except in the case of Eugene Debs.
And a lot of people are name checking Eugene Debs to us tonight on social media and so forth. We've done an episode about Debs, but yeah, ran for president from prison.
In prison.
Yes, in prison. This is his 5th time running for the presidency. And
he's a serial offender, as they say.
Yeah, I know. And the crazy thing about this is that you would think, well, you don't stand a chance. Y'all, he garnered 1 million votes, over 1 million votes from prison. And these were not necessarily for small trumped up charges. I mean, he gave a lot of seditious speeches and was essentially in prison for treasonous charges and speaking out against the war. And he stood by that. He admitted it. He was sort of like, I said what I said. Yeah. and I'm never going to fight for a capitalist country, for a capitalist war. He doubled down. And his followers respected him for that, and they cast their ballots for him, even though he was incarcerated.
And I think this is a moment to talk about what Debs was incarcerated for, because he had violated the Espionage and Sedition Acts. He had called for people to resist the draft in World War I. He had been put in prison for that. I think we look back at that now and say that was an unjust law. It's still in effect. People have been prosecuted for it over the past 10 years. So it's still in effect. But I think now we look at that and we say that was unjust. Yeah. Like, somebody should be able to advocate for people not to be pulled into the draft and still be able to run for president. That's not what this is. I think there are a lot of complicated issues around what this is, because these are not the most central charges to Donald Trump's threats to democracy. Yeah. And at the same time, they are 34 felony convictions. And that is the first time that the first time that a former president has been brought up on felony charges, has been convicted of felony charges. Does that matter?
Yeah. Well, I want to get your thoughts as a final note on that. But before I do that, a couple other things that are being name checked along those lines. A lot of people are pointing out Debs to us on social media. Someone mentioned Grover Cleveland, who apparently admitted to having an illegitimate child during a campaign. And there's an example of, you could just come out and admit this stuff, and maybe that's a better strategy. John Edwards, of course, getting brought up a lot as someone who actually faced very similar charges to what Donald Trump just faced. So there are some parallels, as much as I think it's important to point out how unprecedented all this is. Richard Nixon, resigning, maybe the last time there was a sense of shame in American politics. A couple of people have mentioned that. But on that note, I mean, it's something I'm thinking about a lot too, which is there is the headline of the conviction, or the charges and the guilty verdict.
The conviction, I think we can call it.
And then there is the sort of specifics of the charges, and those being, slightly apart from some of the most grievous things that Donald Trump has done. And I wonder, just what does history remember? Does history remember the nature of the charges, or does history remember just the conviction?
Oh, I think in this case, it's going to be both. I think that, I mean, there's so much to sort of hang your coat on. But when I think about, the allegations was sleeping with this porn star and then using campaign funds to pay her off. And I think that for a party that stands for family values and sort of this evangelical ideas, that does not sit very well. But we have seen also many times in which Trump has said many and done many salacious things when it comes to sexual scandals, and it has been sort of swept under the rug. I don't think that's going to be able to happen this time. I think that Stormy Daniels' name will sort of go down in infamy in the same way that Monica Lewinsky's name has sort of become this like either punchline or joke. And I think that there are other things that are going to get taped onto him as well that just won't be able, in the long history of this, won't be forgotten.
So I feel maybe a little bit differently, which is that I think this is going to be more in the Al Capone sort of vector, which is to say, like, he got caught on taxes, but there were actually this whole other scope of things that he was doing wrong. I mean, the Stormy Daniels part of this case is something that fits, I think, very cleanly into the Monica Lewinsky part, but also then there are questions around Trump's possible violations of dozens of other women. But the idea that, like, he got caught on this, but there were many other laws that he broke. At the same time, I mean, one of the components of this case is that he paid off Stormy Daniels in order to win the 2016 election. And that idea of election interference or election manipulation, that I think is going to have more staying power. And then in the long run, we don't know.
Yeah.
Right? Like this could all be overturned on appeal. There could be like other machinations of the legal system that make this not what it looks like now. I do think it still matters that he's been convicted of 34 felonies. That's a lot of felonies. And there's a part of me that's like anti-carceral state that suggests that maybe it's too many felonies, even for what he did on this particular set of charges. But
the irony to me is that I think all of the other charges aside, if Trump had come out and said, yes, I had this affair with this porn star, and I don't think his numbers would have dropped. I don't think it would have impacted his campaign at all. He had done and said so many other things up until that point that for the people who are the ride or dies, it would not have mattered at all. And that's sort of to me, the irony when I think about, like Nixon doing all of the stuff to win this campaign and, he might have won anyways. It's like, what was the point of all of this?
But maybe the point is that it connects to this larger picture of crookedness and nefarious behavior. And to Niki's point, the specifics of the thing that someone got caught on sort of recede into the background because they've just reinforced this larger picture. I certainly think that's what the Biden campaign is hoping will happen, right? That this will be the kind of thing that taps the keg or whatever, or primes the keg, as they say. But yeah, I mean, I think I tend to agree. Like, I think that it's more of a narrative than it is about the specific actions. But we will see. History will tell. Any final thoughts?
34-91. So
yeah, and we'll see what comes next. So look, this was fun. We're trying to do more of this as the election year goes on. Certainly, as historical sort of moments appear, we want to do some more quick reaction videos. And so, listeners, let us know what you think. What do you want us to talk about? We're not gonna pivot to a full-on election podcast, but obviously our historical brains are on as we watch things play out in real time. So, Niki, Kellie, thank you for doing this, and I will see you back on the regular podcast soon.